This is the Coach and AK Experience with me, Anthony K, and Coach Hue Jackson. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. Welcome, everybody, to the Coach and AK Experience. I'm Anthony K. As always, I'm joined by the Coach, Hue Jackson, and this week, as you can see, a very special guest. That's What She Said podcast, Spain and Fitz. I believe you're the all-time champion in Around the Horn from ESPN, Sarah Spain. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, Sarah.
Coach, we want to jump. Well, you know what? Unfortunately, I'm going to start on a different story. I had a list. I know I sent you guys, but
Audible.
Yeah, we've got to call audible here. Marty Schottenheimer. I feel like we're doing this way too much to kick off the shows, but your kind of what you remember about Marty. I know, we lost him today.
Yeah, there's a lot there.
I figured.
That was the guy that gave me my start in the National Football League. His son and me were very close, introduced his son to his wife. Marty was one of a kind. He's a pro, loved football, loved his family first and foremost, but was a tremendous football coach, tremendous person, ambassador for the game. I'm just thankful for having an opportunity to have him be involved in my life. And obviously he was the head coach of Cleveland at one time, and I had an opportunity to do that. So I'm just thankful for what he instilled in me.
Yeah, we actually had Carl Peterson on the show, Spain and Fitz, who was a GM and front office for the Chiefs for 20 years, gave Schottenheimer his job there, and had some words of thanks for the Browns for letting him go in order to make it possible to be available for that gig. Just had wonderful things to say about as a coach and as a person. And also that there was a bit of peace in his passing just because of the issues he was dealing with in the years before his death. And there is always a little bit of solace in that when the end of someone's life isn't the true quality of the rest of it, in them, finding that peace. So lots of really nice memories from a lot of folks that I've seen today.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm sure the Schottenheimer stories we're gonna hear a lot of them this week. So I wanted to start that off as coach. I knew that you knew him, and as much as we want to jump in and talk Super Bowl, we had not the game we expected this week. I got to tell you, Coach and I both picked the Chiefs. So I'll start that off.
As did many of us. I did as well. Yeah.
And I did say when I picked them, I kind of went, I really hate picking against Brady. It's really tough. So, obviously we're talking a lot about GOATs. We already thought, Coach and I've mentioned it many times, he's already the GOAT. Does this kind of make it impossible for anyone to catch him at this point?
Well, I think the problem with statements like that is that we tend to be prisoners of the moment and remove the possibility of things to drastically change, whether that's the greatest of all time, whether that's repetition in the NFL. I mean, we're doing the opposite, but in the same way with Patrick Mahomes, where there's an assumption that he's going to reel off 7 or 8 titles, even though that's not the norm, right? His talent is unbelievable. But if you look at someone like Russell Wilson, 2 years in, he had 2 Super Bowls and 1 win, and they haven't been able to make even a championship game since. They've been contenders, they've been relevant, he's been talented, but putting all the pieces together is as much the goal in football as it is to have that one individual talent. So Brady doing this with a different team adds a totally different dimension to his greatness, especially one that had the second longest playoff drought. But it had a top 5 defense, had unbelievable weapons, it had incredible coaching. There's a reason why he chose it. And a lot of people eating their words that said this was going to be bad for his legacy to go anywhere away from Belichick. And instead, what they should have said was he picked a perfect team that was already in a winning window and just needed a quarterback that wasn't going to give the ball away as many times as he scored with it.
I think it was Phil Simms at the end of the Super Bowl who said, Tom Brady's going to get the MVP, but Todd Bowles should probably share it with him, right, Coach?
Right. Absolutely. No, Todd did a fantastic job. I just think there's so many things to talk about when you look at that game, because I think there's a human side of this too when I think of Kansas City, because that didn't look like the same team that I think we've all seen. We didn't see the normal adjustments. That's not the first time they've seen a soft cover two from a defense. And I'm not taking anything away from Tampa Bay. I think they did an excellent job. Todd Bowles, Bruce Arians, and the rest of their staff. But boy, I think the situation with the sun does play a role in this somewhat, and I don't think people give it enough um, conversation. And I understand why, because it's not the popular thing to talk about. But I've watched, having been a former coach and stand on sidelines like that, watching adjustments being made. And we've watched Kansas City make several adjustments this year to win games. And I think we were all surprised because that's what we were looking for. Here comes an adjustment. They're going to rally, and here we go. And they knew their offensive line was an issue. They knew that Tampa was playing a soft cover two. The young rookie running back was averaging 7.1 yards a carry. And then all of a sudden, they're still throwing the football like you wouldn't believe. So I just think there was something that got in the way a little bit. And again, I don't want to minimize what Tampa Bay did, but I think there's another issue there that was playing this past Sunday as well.
Well, and I think you're right about that, but I also think I was more surprised that defensively the Chiefs had no answers. Their defense was inconsistent, but I did not expect it to look so helpless against the Bucs. It was the offense that you kind of understood that as a media member, as a bloviating gas bag, we have a tendency to focus on the most prominent big names, especially the fantasy type players, the wide receivers and tight ends and the quarterbacks and maybe even the flashy corners and safeties. We leave those lines out of it, and the trenches can make and break a game. And I remember a couple years ago looking at the Rams that made the Super Bowl, and the next year you're trying to figure out where the drop off is. A lot of similar personnel. What's the difference? And the difference was that when they made the Super Bowl, they had almost zero offensive linemen playing out of position the entire season. They were healthy all year. They lined up in the same spot all year. And the next year they were constantly like a rotator, having to move guys around and make do. And so as much as we did address the injuries to the O-line for Kansas City, we didn't do it nearly enough, because you're right, Coach. They didn't adjust. But I also think that early on, they tried a couple of those things that you would normally do when you're getting beat, and they didn't work. So then they said, I guess our best option is Patrick Mahomes to run 479 yards before passing over the course of the game and hope that he makes magic, because that's who he is, because that's a better option than trying to get these guys playing out of position to do what they're supposed to do, because it ain't working. And I saw a couple of those attempted adjustments that you would normally do, and then they just bailed on it all. And they were like, well, all right, just go play like you're doing a turkey bowl. Find an open guy. It was tough to watch.
Yeah, the line is not the sexy thing to talk about, but it really, that was the difference in this game. And yeah, I was going to bring that up. He ran for over 400 yards to get nowhere. It's tough to win a game that way. So, we saw that for all as talented as Mahomes is, he's human, right? You still need a line, you still need protection, you still have to get guys time to get open. So Brady and Gronk both said coming back next year. Does that surprise you at all?
Not me. I think Tom. People don't understand. Tom is in love with winning, and he's also in love with the process. And I think the people who are close to him, the Gronkowskis and those guys, they're the same way. They have that same kind of mentality. So I'm not surprised by him returning, both of them returning. I will be surprised if they can hold the whole team back together. In this new age of free agency, some of these guys are going to get top dollars from other teams. Can they really rekindle what they had this year? But when you have Tom Brady, you got to feel good about it.
Yeah, I was going to say, you have to hope you become the New England, where a bunch of vets looking for a ring think, oh, I'll go to Florida, no income tax, good weather, go on down there and see if I can team up with those guys that have a pretty good record. I'm not surprised about Brady at all. I'm not surprised about Gronk, because it's tough. As much as it's a nice story to retire on top, it's tough to leave when you've got that fresh feeling of victory. But I have to say, as someone who spent a pretty good amount of time with Gronk, a decent amount of time with Gronk, and he's a bit more thoughtful than the big dumb puppy that he plays. And to see him very honestly talk about the pain that he was in when he retired. It felt extremely genuine and not just like a guy coming off a season who needed some time to forget the pain and get back into it. It really felt like someone who just couldn't imagine going through life feeling like that. And so the CBD that he was promoting, I guess, did the job. And then the opportunity to play somewhere other than New England, where he could fool his coaches with OTAs by changing his shirt and doing rinse sprints one day instead of 7. I was thinking about Brady and I was like, okay, this guy has not a strawberry in 20 years. And meanwhile, Gronk's like, so I didn't do the workouts. I just changed my shirt. Brady's like, damn it. I need everyone to give their all like me. But yeah, I could see Gronk. What's wild is Gronk is the same age as Travis Kelce.
I heard that and I was shocked.
And I'm out here talking about, well, he's become more of a blocker because of the wear and tear and because of how old he is. And I'm like, oh no, they're the same age. But Kelce did come into the league, I want to say 3 years older when he started, because he was a late college and came out of college at an older age. But it's still pretty wild how we look at Gronk like this old wizened man, and he's 31.
We look at him like he's the same age as Brady, and Brady's got over a decade on him. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So Tampa Bay obviously has, as tough as it is in the NFL, to repeat. When you look to next year, assuming things come, they're probably in that conversation again, right? They have as good a chance as any to repeat, because that's super, obviously incredibly tough, right, Coach?
Oh yeah, no, they do. I mean, they have to go in as the favorites, no different than Kansas City a year ago. Like I said, I think the key will be this free agency. Can they really hold everything together and keep all the players that were there this year, or even improve? So that will be interesting. I think in the NFC, there's not as many good quarterbacks as there is in the AFC. Now if somebody can convince Deshaun Watson to get him out of the Texans and get him somewhere in the NFC, then there's a whole different dynamic to all of this. But I think Tampa Bay has a really good chance of returning. But it's going to be interesting to see how the offseason shakes out.
Well, that's a great segue, Coach, because now we're going to do a little QB carousel, because obviously the first one dropped. So you and I talked about the Rams. Obviously, you were the first one that I heard say Goff's on his way out, and they should probably look at Watson. They went in a different direction. They went with Stafford. How do we feel, Sarah, about Matthew Stafford in LA?
I'm excited for him as a fantastic quarterback to get a shot outside of the Detroit franchise. I think he'll be a really good fit in that offense. I'd like to see him, be able to do some more things because of the coaching staff and how they're going to be able to adjust to his skill set. That deal was a really interesting one. It had elements of almost an NBA deal of a salary dump, right? Not only did the Rams want Stafford, but they also needed to get rid of that Goff contract. And so they were willing to send pieces along with him. They wanted Stafford as much as they wanted a quicker, cleaner slate, which is to say that they'll have a couple of years, they'll see how Stafford is, and then they'll move on with a still window with the coach that they have and some of that talent that they have. And for the Lions, I don't even know how long Goff will be there. They'll give it a shot, but I think part of the reason they gave Campbell a 6-year deal is to say, we'll give you a little while to clean up this mess, and then you'll get to start fresh with a whole bunch of draft picks. I mean, the Rams have been pretty forward thinking in terms of the way they use their draft picks. They assume that they're going to be near the top, and if they're somewhere around 28, 29, 30, they're okay parting with a gamble that low in the first round in order to have a sure thing. And so far it's worked for them. And if it was my team, which unfortunately we hopefully won't get to the Chicago Bears, but I would much prefer a team that prioritizes the present at the possible mortgaging of the future, because then you can figure out the future when you get there if things don't look the way you wanted. But if you continually play the game, we're not willing to give away the future to take advantage of a window that you're in, then you just stay mediocre forever and ever and ever. And you keep talking about the 85 Bears for the rest of your life, even though you weren't old enough to enjoy it. And now they all run car dealerships and they still make tons of money doing appearances because no one has won since then.
Coach, she's been listening to the show and she knows I bring up the Bears every episode. Apparently we will get to the Bears, but not yet. How do we feel about Stafford in LA, Coach?
I'm optimistic. I think Brad Holmes fleeced him. I think he left and went to Detroit and said, okay, I know a team that will give us a quarterback, some draft picks, and we got a chance to really hit this thing running. And I was surprised at what they got for him. I really was. I think Detroit won that one, but by far. And I think the dynamic of how this young man, talking about Stafford's going to fit in the locker room in LA is going to be important, because I know Andrew Whitworth and Goff were really tight. I think there's several other players he was really tight with. Again, they went to the Super Bowl together. Stafford has not played in a playoff game in a long time. So I just think that's a dynamic you're going to have to work through. I think Stafford's going to have to go there and prove himself. It's not like Tom Brady going to Tampa. This is Stafford going to the Rams, So I think it's going to be interesting. I don't know how that's going to truly unfold, but I think Detroit is well on their way. If they can piece a lot of these things together, they got a chance to be better, and you can see a brighter future for them.
Do you think this deal, sending Stafford to the Rams, made the price of Deshaun Watson too high, and that's why it's taking so long? Or are teams, or is coach and the new GM, everybody in Houston, just trying to hold on to Deshaun to maybe convince him to stay, although everything we hear is that he wants out? Are they slow playing because they're trying to convince him to stay?
You better believe they are.
Well, it'd be the right thing to do, of course, but
yeah, they better be begging him every day to stay. I think there's no question that they are. But the first part of your question is, did it really up the ante for what someone would have to give up for him? Absolutely, it did. But when you have a guy that's as talented as him, I mean, that he is the missing link to maybe a team getting to the Super Bowl. It's no different than Tom Brady. I'm not calling him Tom Brady. But I think the impact he could have could be Tom Brady-like. So somebody's going to pay it at the right time.
I agree with half of what Coach said. So I'll start with the part that I'm not so sure I agree with. I don't know that this deal, for people in the meeting rooms that are taking the calls about Deshaun, will actually reflect it all in terms of the package you're going to get for him, because of the fact that there was so much of a contract attached to Goff, and they had decided that they didn't think he was a fit anymore. When you have that much money, I mean, they had him signed to an extension that he hasn't started yet.
Absolutely.
They're trading him before the 4-year extension starts. So they wanted out on him, which made their leverage so much less than the team that's getting rid of the great player. So that's, that makes Stafford sort of the Watson in the deal, except for the fact that Watson's got a very long, very big contract, and he's a superstar at 25. He's a proven commodity. Stafford, as great as he is of a player, to Coach's point earlier, he's played in like one playoff game. He's not a winner as far as we know. And there are absolutely aspects of the Lions' failures that have to be put on his shoulders as well, occasionally in those big moments. So there isn't really a piece of that deal that's anywhere close to what we're dealing with when it comes to trading at Deshaun Watson. So if you tried to come in with comps, they would kind of laugh at what you would need to give up. And so I think there is probably a bit of reticence because you don't want to get fleeced and you don't want to rush into something. But I also think we may be in for a pretty long game of chicken, where they would even consider letting him sit out a season until they get the deal that they want. Because right now, the public nature of Watson's demands mean that everybody assumes that he's gone no matter what, that he can't be convinced. And if that's the case, you're offering less than he's worth in the hopes that they bite, because they want to get things figured out before the draft and before the season, everything else. So if they're willing to sit tight enough and Watson is willing to hold strong enough to sit out, we could waste a whole season of them sitting. That would be extremely rare, but so is what's happening. We just don't see NFL players have the kind of unicorn collection of assets that Deshaun Watson has, between age and talent and situation on that team, to try to force something like this. Even those that are really talented haven't tried to pull it off. I think in the end, they're going to get an absurd deal. Everyone's going back to like Herschel Walker, right? There's going to be like some trade that blows your mind, and it's going to be worth it, because, that position, there's no equal spot in the league where, you lose something like that and you ever get back what you're losing. So they have to try their best to get as close as they can.
So who's the team, Sarah, that makes that?
Of course, the Chicago Bears. We're going to change the name of the city to Deshago, and I'm hoping that's the thing that puts them over the edge. It feels like Miami. And the cool thing about the Miami deal is that Bill Barnwell's version of it would have Tua going to the Bears, which would be awesome. Because I'll take someone that's got some ceiling like that and see what he's got. No, I mean, it feels like the Dolphins because they have the most assets and because they have a quarterback in Tua that whether there's a third team involved or not is something that they would truly be interested in. And there's enough potential there to believe in. I don't think Bradford has that kind of vibe yet. And it's hard to separate him from what franchise he's been with. But I don't see the Jets have assets, but Watson, to me, has to want to go somewhere. And I'm not sure I'm buying the rumors about him wanting to go to the Jets just because of Robert Saleh. I think it'd be a very weird thing for him to choose to go to. So I think that could be some media manipulation coming from the Jets themselves to indicate, and we would find out pretty quick based on the fact that he has a no trade clause. If they tried to make that deal, and he was like, "The Jets? No, that was not me who said that I wanted to play for the Jets."
Yeah, that would definitely surprise me when I heard the Jets were on the list. I thought that might have been from the Texans trying to up the ante from the other teams, knowing what the Jets could give up. Coach, are you still on a certain NFC West Coast team, or have you changed your mind a little bit?
Haven't. I think San Francisco is going to definitely entertain it. They're going to stick their toe in the water and see what it feels like. I think most teams have to. I mean, he's too good of a talent not to do that. But you have to have the right thought process as an organization when you make this kind of decision, because you don't want to become just quarterback rich and nowhere else can you have a chance to win. I say this all the time. Talent doesn't fit everywhere. Will it fit in San Francisco? Yes, because I think the coach is really, really good. As she mentioned, will it fit in New York? I don't know that. I just think he needs to be with a proven winner.
Yeah.
Somebody knows how to take that talent and put it in the right situation so that he can show his value, because he's a tremendous player.
I can't imagine the Jets. They have two players that are like fully guaranteed worth retaining. They have no Pro Bowlers. You know what I mean? Like, you're going to a skeleton, and I don't know whether he'd want to do that with already feeling like a couple of years of his career lost to bad management. Jaguars another interesting one because they've got the pick, which is very valuable at the quarterback, and they have a ton of cap space and picks. So they have a future ahead of them that they could build around. And if they wanted to make a whole bunch of moves at once and start competing within his window immediately, they could do that if they were willing to give some of those up. So they're interesting too.
Yeah, that is an interesting one. The San Francisco one it makes so much sense because he saw what Tom Brady just did. They're going to get all their defensive players kind of back and healthy. You throw in Deshaun Watson into there, right? They're an immediate Super Bowl contender.
But do they have enough to give?
That's the question.
What are I mean, this is about the Texans feeling like they're not. It's embarrassing enough to lose this guy, no matter the terms of it. So you got to have some pretty big things coming your way to ease the pain of getting rid of Hopkins and then blowing it with Watson. And then what does JJ Watt decide to do? Right, the rest of that.
I was about to say back-to-back years you lose Hopkins and then Watson. That's got to be tough on Texans fans. So let's assume he goes to San Francisco. They find a package. Well, now Jimmy G's out of a job. Where do you think he's picked up pretty quickly, Coach?
I really do. I think there's these tiers of quarterbacks, and he's in one of those tiers. He's not in the top tier, but I think he's in that next level. You can win with him. I think people know that. If I'm the Texans, I want to get him out of the AFC. I'll take a little less for him to be in the NFC because it takes a little of the pressure off of having to face him. But at the same time, I think Jimmy, if it is San Francisco, he'll get picked up pretty quickly.
Do the Patriots bring him back?
As they can.
Yeah.
Yeah, you agree too? Okay.
Well, we'll find out a lot about all those stories behind the scenes of Belichick being, manipulated into sending him somewhere, giving him a cushy deal, a good, nice landing spot, and if he still feels strongly. The question is, how much of a rift was there really between Belichick and Kraft about Jimmy G, and how much is that reopened if he comes back into the fold? So
right. Okay, last one, because the rumors are the Bears are looking to make a trade and bring in Carson Wentz. You had the same reaction that I had when I first heard it. So I'm going to start with my fellow, pain. It hurts us Bears fan. So do you think, I don't like this move at all, What if it does happen? What are your
Here's the
thoughts?
thing. The Bears, first of all, getting Philly retread quarterbacks hasn't panned out thus far in the last year. And the ceiling on Wentz at one point was MVP caliber. Is that guy still in there? How much of his decline was offensive line issues, lack of weapons, coaching, lack of confidence? But this guy was bottom of the league in many important stats this year. He was benched. Okay. And now I use this analogy, but it's spot on. It's like when you're dating someone and they treat you like crap, so you break up and you go tell your friends how trash he was. And they all agree he was trash, you're better than that. And then you get back together and you have to trot him back out and be like, okay, so he really wasn't that bad. Like that's what the Eagles are trying to do with Wentz. They benched him. They were ready to give up on him. And now they're trying to act like he's worth this giant haul. This is not a guy that was starting in the NFL. This guy's numbers were putrid. And yeah, you could say a lot of that has to do with situation. He could go somewhere else and be great, but that's a big if. And for me, I just want the Bears to have a franchise quarterback for once in my lifetime. The only excitement around the position has been Jay Cutler, who has like every record in the books, and he was fine, but he wasn't a guy you're going to win a lot with. And we didn't. And then you blow the great draft pick in the great quarterback draft on Trubisky, which we all know how that turned out. So I just want something better than another team's guy that they don't want anymore. I, for once, want to make the big deal that gets you the quarterback that other people want and not just another, well, he's probably better than Mitch. That's not enough. We have had, I can't tell you how many times I've had to use the name Sid Luckman. I've never seen him play. He was done way before I was born. There's no reason I should have to know anything about Sid Luckman. And yet I constantly have to bring him up because it's the last time the Bears had a great quarterback. And I apologize, to Jim McMahon, but he was good for what he needed to do with a great defense. So I just want more excitement than a guy that became the butt of the joke in the NFL for most of last season.
Coach was very high on Trubisky, right, Coach?
Oh my God. No,
is that true?
No.
I just think.
I mean, my boy Louis Riddick, who knows this stuff, was like Maserati Mitch. I see good things, and I was like, okay. Oh, okay.
Yeah, he was not Maserati Rich. He's more like Pinto Rich, and they don't even make Pinto.
Mazda Mitch.
Mazda Mitch.
I just think think of Philadelphia. They made a decision to hire a coach because I really think they thought that this guy was going to have Carson be the guy for him. And I think Carson says, wait a minute, that's not the guy for me. So I want out. So I wonder where that is also in this equation in Philadelphia, because trust me, there's no reason why other than Carson did they hire this guy. Nobody ever heard of this guy. And now all of a sudden they're sitting there and realizing that, wait a minute, we can't make this guy stay. He doesn't want to stay here, with this particular coach. So it's going to be interesting all the way around how this unfolds. And normally where there's smoke, there's smoke. So people say he's going to Chicago. So you two better believe he's going to Chicago.
Well, I will say this. It does reveal a bit of a mess with Philly that first they pulled the stuff with the last game of the season, which I contend was almost certainly a message from above to Doug Peterson. So then he gets thrown under the bus for that. They clearly fire him because of Wentz, believing that they can save that relationship because they have so much money sunk in him. So they get rid of a guy who won the Super Bowl just a couple of years ago that no one thought would be on that short of leash because they have to save this relationship because of the financial reasons. And then they bring in Sirianni, who, again, the ties to Frank Reich and everything else. They're like, this is going to be the guy. Although Sirianni did hire a guy who's known Jalen Hurts since he was a young kid. So they at least have some connection to both quarterbacks in case there was a quarterback battle that got won. But, Coach, I think you're right. Like, what a mess it is to fire your coach to keep a guy that still doesn't want to be there. So now you're going to end up having blown up everything from that Super Bowl with not much to show for it. I hope you're wrong about the smoke. The smoke was coming from sources that don't usually break that kind of news. So I'm hoping that it was a reach, sort of in the way that a big name person broke Trevor Bauer to the Mets, and that didn't actually happen. So let's just hope that there's a reason it hasn't been made official.
You two need to Spring, that's for sure.
Well, I was going to ask you two things, Coach, because when you look at Carson Wentz, right? Does he still look like someone in look it all there's always the system that comes into play, but does he look like a quarterback that still has it? Like, can he regain that MVP caliber, or do you see something that's just like it's gonna be tough?
It's going to be tough. I think Sarah laid it out. I mean, I think there's so many issues here. And the biggest issue is what's between his ears. Where is he mentally? And what does he want out of this? And I think those things don't get talked about enough. I'll say it again. You're not getting Carson Wentz of 2016, 2017. You're getting a player that's been battered and bruised and beat down. And, so what am I getting? And how are we equipped to take him from where he is to where he needs to be? I think all of those things have to be answered before you ever make this decision. It doesn't look good on the outside. It might sound good to everybody, but it sure doesn't look good right now.
Yeah. And the injuries are a big part of it too, like you mentioned. There's a reason we know so much about how Nick Foles plays in the postseason, because Carson Wentz is never available for it. And that's another big thing. Past best predictor of injuries is past injuries, and he's had plenty of them. So to dump your faith into a retread that's injured all the time, now I'm even sadder. Thanks a lot, Coach.
Well, that's okay, because I keep hearing, and there's smoke, right? That the Colts and his ties to Frank Wright. So maybe the Colts take a chance on Wentz, and let's pray for that one. So this week, there was a 30 for 30. I know, Sarah, you talked about it, Coach. Obviously, I know that you were very close with Al Davis. It was Al Davis versus the NFL. Not sure if you've had a chance to watch it though, Coach, but I just thought a good opportunity to talk about Al Davis, a great personality, obviously a man who gave you a shot as a head coach, and we've talked about some great stories about him. But what did we take away from that 30 for 30, and how bad was it between Al Davis and the commish?
Obviously, it was really bad, and I think they tried to document it as best they could. The animation piece was getting to me.
Yeah, it was a little weird.
It was very weird, but it was really different. But at the same time, I didn't know everything, but I knew that there was some really deep-seated disagreements. I know Al stood for what Al stood for, and that's who he was, and that's how he ran his business, and he was a tremendous leader. Obviously, that's an icon. But it opened my eyes even more so to where the league is today. And the things that have gone on are still an issue, in the league. If you really dig in between the lines a little bit, some of the same things still exist today. So, and you don't have many Al Davis types that are going to fight the National Football League. You don't see that right now. And so I'm thankful for him. I wish there was more people who was more forward thinking and had vision that he has. But at the same time, boy, what a tremendous man he was.
Yeah, we actually had the director of the film on Spain and Fitz, and it was interesting to ask him about. We didn't get into the animation so much as just the idea that he didn't want to do any current interviews. He thought all the information was best said by the people that were involved, and that he had all those interviews, and so he would recreate them, and sort of that the story had reached its logical conclusion with the victory of a team in Vegas opening its doors eventually to fans. So it was interesting. And I do think that for all the drama with the NFL, sometimes that overshadows his history of diverse hiring and being open-minded and forward-thinking. I've had the chance to spend some time with Amy Trask and just talk to her about that whole experience. And he was way ahead of the game on that. So I thought it was interesting. I agree, though. We're all going to have to get used to those deep fakes and those holograms. Like, I know most of us aren't going to have a husband who buys our deceased relatives into hologram form for us, like Kim Kardashian, but we are going to have to see them in the form of a lot of movies and stuff.
Well, you're going to be okay, right? Because I know this isn't true, but when you're Twitter, you married that billionaire, right? So I'm sure you're.
Yeah. I mean, let me tell you this, and this is no shade on you guys. If I was a billionaire, I would not be here. I would also not.
If you
I
did
would not
marry
have been in
billionaires,
Chicago for the
no.
last year. I would have hopped on my PJ and I would have been on an island that I owned, and I would not still have a job because I would just be enjoying my 9,000 rescue dogs on an island and reading books. So
kind of the reason why I didn't believe it.
yeah. Oh my, I mean, the number of people that do believe it, it's so frustrating too. It's some random like translated to English website and people just run with it to the point where like my husband's on the board for a Syrian refugee group. And when he first joined, like they scheduled a meeting with him and he could tell by the way they were acting and talking that they thought it was real. And it was heartbreaking for him to be like, I wish I had $1 billion and I could just give it to all of you. Like, oh, or he's a realtor. They'll be like, we know that you are very successful, so we want to make sure you're really going to put the time and effort into our rental, even if it's not that. And he's like, oh, I'm not a billionaire.
So coach,
maybe the internet's just putting it into the future for us.
hey,
Those little Twitter things that land on the Super Bowl field and then they say, you know, it's someone's tweet from 6 years ago, I'm going to be in the Super Bowl. Maybe the internet is just telling us that years from now we'll laugh while sitting upon our billions. Remember when we weren't billionaires?
Well, I hope you guys get it. I hope I get it.
Yeah, I'll give you a couple million if it's.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll take care of you guys. So I wanted to bring that up because, like I said, you see so many things that are just when you read them,
people are dumb. People are so dumb, and social media has really allowed us all to truly understand the scope of ignorance. Because if we all surround ourselves with mostly intelligent people, then we don't come across the people on the internet. Like what? How?
How do you deal? So this is not something we were going to talk about, but how do you, and both of you, right? Like I read the replies to, postings because they're funny and I believe these people strongly believe what they're saying. How do you guys deal with that stuff? Right? Like I know Sarah, obviously we talk about that, but there's a lot. Coach, I know you get it too. How do you just ignore it? Do you take it? Does it affect you at all?
I really
Coach, what do you do?
I ignore it. I mean, you can. There's so many people that are going to write things and they have no idea what they're writing. And if you start buying into that, once you go that way, you're going to always go that way. And that's not what you want to be doing. I never paid attention to it. I don't think you can. And you just got to always keep that other voice out of your head when you think you want to look, because it just doesn't serve any purpose.
I wish I could say I ignore and don't look. I don't respond to most of them. I do a lot of muting and blocking. I selectively choose people either because they have set themselves up for like a really funny clapback and I want to just get some humor out of it. Or if they're repeating something that I've seen a bunch that I think is a really damaging stereotype or approach, that I want to use them as an example for all the people that are listening and watching, but not commenting, who might not be sure how they feel about something. So if it's something that I think is meaningful to address, I'll just pick one at random and use them as sort of, I don't expect to change their mind, but I hope everyone paying attention says, oh, she's right. Like that is not but I get asked this a lot, and I just don't think it's fair, especially for women in the industry, to just consistently internalize and digest that stuff repeatedly without an outlet. So if it does make you feel better occasionally to clap back or to use them as an example or to show people what you're going through, I don't mind it. But I think you have to have a thick enough skin. And so for me, the majority of the time, I truly feel bad for the people. Like if I'm having a bad day and I look on TV and I'm like, I shouldn't have worn that shirt. It's not flattering. And then a bunch of people are like, you look fat. I'm like, I got it. Doing my best. And so sometimes that'll hurt my feelings. But for the most part, what I actually think about is I feel sad for you that you're sad, because happy and satisfied people don't spend their days just messaging a bunch of people on TV. You're fat, you're stupid, screw you. So they must be sad. And so sometimes I'll even just mention that. I'll be, hey, it seems like you're going through something based on your timeline. Like, I hope things get better, because successful people want everybody else to be successful and happy too. And sad people want to bring you down. So I don't usually let them get to me any more than it's just either sad for them or just depressed sometimes that there are still so many people that are racist and homophobic and misogynist, and that they exist. And even if they're kind of not taking it seriously, that they're still willing to put those things in writing. Back to the stupid thing, I also think if you surround yourself with not racist, not terrible people, then being reminded of how many there are on social media is really depressing.
I feel like the last 4 years has really allowed extra people to come out and show how kind of stupid they are, which
Yeah, I think that's the right choice of words. I don't think they became that way. I think they've always
no.
been there. But when you have people in power that are parroting and saying the things that you say as well, then you feel empowered to say them.
I just had this conversation maybe 2 hours ago where I said it wasn't like everybody changed. It's now they just felt more comfortable coming out with what they
Yeah.
were going to say. Um, every week on this show, Sarah, we talk about issues in the world. And the last few weeks, we've talked about obviously the coaching hires in the NFL. We had 7 openings, and not until the last one did we get. Well, let me ask this question first: is Lebanese a minority?
No.
I think it counts as brown, and I think in a predominantly white league, I'm counting black and brown and Hispanic and Asian. I'm counting anything that isn't white as progress. But I think in a sport that is 70% black or whatever the number is, it's not the same achievement as a black man getting that kind of job.
Because that was the one before Cully got hired in for the Texans, right? That was the one that the NFL was kind of, hey, look at us. But there were 7 openings, and 70% of the league are minorities, and you hired one coach right at the end to probably appease some people, because if you didn't, there probably would have been. Hopefully, there would have been.
Well, yeah, trying to hang on to Deshaun Watson, but he's
rough.
I don't think
I don't think that's going to help. But yeah. So a lot of these hires, and we talk about the diversity and inclusion report. I didn't know it existed. Do you know that has been coming out every year since 2013 from the NFL?
Well, and then also Dr. Richard Lapchick does a great job of going across both media entities and leagues for diversity and race hiring report cards. So he's been on the forefront of that for a long time. So I have a great relationship with Sam Rappaport, who's in the NFL and has been for a number of years now, with the title of, it's something around diversity and inclusion. She has just had a gentleman, Jonathan Bean, hired above her as the now senior executive of diversity, inclusion, whatever, which applies to both women in the NFL and minority coaches and staff and everything else. She put together this really incredible women's forum that is invite only, based on women in the pipeline in coaching positions that would be ready for a professional job right away. So a lot of them coming out of, Dartmouth, like Jennifer King with the Washington football team, Coach Lori Locust, who is on the Bucs staff, assistant defensive line coach. They find women that are already coaching. They bring them to this forum. They invite coaches and representatives from teams to have these interviews in person there, where they can really be immediately put in touch, because the pipeline is usually the problem for underrepresented people in coaching, which is the same for coaches of color, which is why coordinators are so necessary in order to take that next step. The problem is that if there is a barrier, subconscious or otherwise, at the hiring level, the front office and ownership, wherein they believe that men of color cannot make good leaders, they might be good coordinators, but not leaders and faces of franchises, then it's not going to matter whether they were successful coordinators. They're not going to be elevated. And that's usually going to come down to them feeling comfortable and believing that the things that match their idea of leadership and connection and intelligence and everything else are the same as what it means to lead a team of young people, of people of color, of diverse backgrounds. And that disconnect doesn't have to mean that they're flat out intentionally racist. It can just mean that they have no clue how disconnected their lives are from the lives of the people that are being coached. And that seems to still be the barrier when you see Bieniemy and Bowles. I mean, Bowles did have an opportunity. It didn't go well. So he's, perhaps needing to work his way back up to that. Byron Leftwich, et cetera. And I also think that, unfortunately, Eric Bieniemy there's a danger in holding him up as a single representative of progress, because then when he does get hired, it becomes an easy, well, look at Eric Bieniemy. That's what you guys kept asking for. And I think the problem is that there's such a limited number of coaches that people are holding up as examples of being worthy, that we're ignoring the fact that no one was talking about Nick Sirianni, right? That these coaches that are not at all talked about will get that job and be given that chance, while we're still harping on just the one guy that we've decided is going to be the figurehead for Black coaches who have been, not given the opportunities they deserve. I just babbled for a really long time. Sorry.
That's okay, but that's the thing we talk about is these moving goalposts, right? We say Todd Bowles had a chance and it didn't work out, but Gase had a chance in Miami. It didn't work out, but he got another chance right away. These minority coaches are told, Coach, I know you're going to jump in because I know how you feel about this, but they're told, hey, become a coordinator, show what you can do, and then you'll get a shot. And then they don't get a shot, and some guy you've never heard of who's never called a play. I know I'm stealing some of your words here, Coach, who's never called a play. Oh, well, yeah, he seemed really great. We're going to give him a shot. And they just kind of jump the line. And Coach, we talked about, less than in the 100-year history, I think it's less than 20, 18, 19 minority coaches in the 100 years. Did you know that, you probably know this because you're one of them, there's only 5, maybe 6 that came from the offensive side of the ball? I didn't do that.
6 now. Yes.
6 now.
Yeah. It's disappointing. It's not a pipeline issue. It's not any of those issues. It is a deep-seated racial issue. Let's just be real, and that's what it is. When you go back to the start of the league, minorities were not included in the league. I mean, it took litigation to get the first player to be involved in the National Football League. And I think as it went on, I think the owners realized that these minority players can make money, because of the way they play. But we don't need you to lead. We're not looking for you to be in a leadership position. And I think the 20 coaches and 19, however many we want to debate about, I think we're outliers. We're the guys that fell through the cracks and made it and had our opportunities. But a lot of those guys have made it harder for minority men to get opportunities, because in order to be seen as a group of men who have what it takes, you need to be successful. And there's not a lot of success there. There's some, but not a lot. And it's disappointing on every end. I commend Bruce Arians for what he did with his staff. When you look, you say that's not normal. You don't have a Caucasian coach with every leadership position being run by minority representation. That doesn't happen. What is normal is you see a coach and maybe you see a Caucasian coordinator on offense, defense, and special teams. That's seen as normal. And so that's why it had gave so much, attention to it. I think what Ryan Clark said was really amazing. He thanked Bruce Arians for what he did. And then you look and there's more guys on that staff than there is National Football League head coaches. I mean, minorities. I mean, that's amazing to me to have to be able to look at that and say that's where we are today. And there's a reason for it. And I just get tired of all the lip service that gets put out there about, well, they got to look like you. They got to act like you. That's not it. They don't want us to be in those leadership roles, because if they did, we would be. It is not that hard. I think James Brown had a segment on CBS prior to the Super Bowl, and I thought he was outstanding. He called it for what it was. He called some people out, and you don't hear about it anymore because that's normally what they do. They don't want to hear it. They don't want to take the deep dive into it and figure out exactly what's going on and what the issues are. No one's really interested in doing that. This is not an Eric Bieniemy problem. This is a National Football League problem. And I agree with what Sarah said. They keep pumping up Eric because he's been in a Super Bowl. They're setting him up for failure. They really are at the end of the day. But I'm just disappointed in the whole process. I look at Coach Kelly, thankful that he got the opportunity, but they hired his whole staff. He didn't hire him. They hired him. So this was about Deshaun Watson. And to me, that needs to be said. It needs to be put out there that way, because that's what it was. It wasn't for any other reason. They thought if they can go find a man of color, that Deshaun Watson said, yeah, okay, I'm going to be there. Well, it's no different than what's happening with Carson Wentz. Players don't see it just that way. Their value and their opportunity to win, they know is tied to coaching and an environment and all that. That doesn't solve the problem. And you said it, there were 7 opportunities, and the census in the U.S. says Lebanese is white. Just so we all on the page.
Interesting.
That just
that.
what,
Yeah. Well, and with Cully, the unfortunate thing is too, he's entering the absolute worst possible scenario for a new coach. Like you said, he didn't hire his own guys. His franchise quarterback is on the way out. They just traded away their superstar wide receiver. By all accounts, Jack Easterby's role within that franchise is going to result in deleterious effects beyond just Deshaun Watson wanting to leave. And then we're going to point to him as a guy who got a shot and failed, and it's not going to be reflective at all of his talent if he does, which I think is really unfortunate.
We say this, and we've talked about it too. When when a minority coach gets an opportunity, they have to win, and if they lose, that hurts. But hold on, if you go back, and obviously I go back to 06 as often as I can, there was 7 minority head coaches, and 2 of them met in the Super Bowl. And we've had this report every year saying it's an issue. We got to focus. We need to hold on. 2 of them were in the Super Bowl, and it's gone down significantly since. So even success doesn't seem to matter. And that's the part, right? That just you win, you lose, it doesn't matter, right? You had Coach Dungy and Coach Smith, obviously a Super Bowl that I paid very close attention to, and it didn't go from 7 to 9 or 11. It went from 7 to 3 this year. We're going backwards, and yet every year we talk, right? This year, Roger Goodell came out and said it's important. We need to focus, but I'm not seeing any actions. Maybe I'm missing something. You're closer to it, maybe, Sarah. Like, am I missing something other than the talk? Has there been any action?
No, and I think what Coach said is right, and I didn't articulate it well. I do think there's some actual full-on racism in the part of some owners. And then I think there are others that believe themselves to be making choices based on what they think is the right thing for the team, because we know they all want to win. Like, right, that's why sports is supposed to be a meritocracy where you can elevate the best, because you're willing at any price, whether that's players that have issues that you're willing to overlook or defend because they bring you money or wins. So you would think that they would not make choices that were counterproductive. So they're not choosing somebody worse, but they are unable to see the long-held stereotypes and prejudices that they hold within, that society is embedded within them en route to making their decisions. If you reflect back on some of the language around the Bears picking Mitch Trubisky, we liked having dinner with him, and we liked that he drove that hunker of a car and didn't seem like he had a lot of swag and ego about him. That's terrible decision-making wrapped up in a feeling of comfort. Nick Sirianni, we kind of surprised him with the job offer, because even Nick Sirianni didn't realize he was in the mix for a head coaching job. So he didn't have any nice clothes with him. So we just dressed down to make him feel comfortable, right? Like, you hear this language and it's not flat out dog whistles. Like, it's not flat out racism, but what it all results in is this idea of people who do not see that their own barriers to success are themselves, and the things that prevent them from seeing what's right in front of them. And I don't know how you fix that. It's honestly, it's the same with women, right? The idea that people can't see successful women rising because it doesn't feel comfortable for them to imagine a female boss or a female in charge. And so as long as the decision making is still predominantly cis white old men in the NFL, it's really hard to get past that, even if they claim to be doing the work, and even if they keep coming up with, in some ways, insulting in initiatives and payoffs, like they have now, where you get draft picks if your coach gets hired.
There's more women coaching in the National Football League today than there are minority head coaches, and I'm all for them. But it just
there's a lot of jobs though, right? They're a trainer or an assistant. There's hundreds of those jobs versus just 32. But I agree with you.
But if there's 100, then there should be 100 minority men that are also there too, and they're not. So right. we can jump on this as all we want. The bottom line is they'd rather talk about women in the National Football League than doing what's right. And to me, that's a problem within itself. And I'm all for women getting opportunities, but there's a whole bunch of minority men that have not had opportunities in this league. And I'm fortunate I've done it twice in two organizations that were totally different. But at the same time, I mean, we're not moving the needle any way, shape, or form as to what it should be right at this particular point in time in our world.
I ask everyone who joins us, Sarah, so I'm going to ask you, is there a way to fix this? Obviously, the Rooney Rule didn't work. This, compensating the team that loses the coach, I don't think anyone even thought that was a good idea. Is there a way can it be done?
I do think that over the course of time, I hope and believe that overall societal views and opinions can evolve. And I hope that that results in people growing up with fewer embedded beliefs about the abilities and intelligence and qualifications of people of color. But that's a long play, right? That's growing up in environments that are more diverse and in situations and in groups of people that allow for more exposure to diverse thoughts and perspectives and lived experiences and believing in the value of them. I think across the board, we're doing better. We're moving in the right direction, although the last 4 years have certainly been hit or miss when it comes to that stuff. But there's no quick fix.
Wait, so how are we doing better? I'm lost. I don't.
No, I'm not talking about the NFL. I'm talking about society. I'm not talking about the NFL. I'm saying
we're talking about
I'm saying
in society.
So what I'm saying is, I think it's the same thing that I say when people ask me about how we can make the sports industry better for women. And I say it's just a trickle-down effect of society. If society doesn't value women, and if society doesn't believe that women are the protagonists of their own stories, they're just auxiliary characters that either get in the way of or help men, then their value is never going to be prioritized enough to see them differently. And if we don't see people as valuable individuals whose brains and souls just happen to be in a different skin suit, then we can't change the way we view them enough to pervasively affect the ingrained and subconscious ideas we have about them. I feel the same way about diversity and race in America. It's a hundreds and hundreds of years issue. The only way I'd say I think we're getting better is I think our conversations are evolving. We're not starting from the beginning every time again. It felt that way with George Floyd. It felt like certainly there are still morons who haven't learned anything and haven't spent the time in their life to engage themselves and educate themselves. But a lot of people, when George Floyd happened, didn't start at the same place as they did with Trayvon Martin, didn't start at the same place as they did with, previous cases. They actually said, here's where the starting point is now, we're moving from there. And it involved diversity hiring practices, and it involved other ways that we're attempting to bridge the gaps and uncover the ways that we have either subconsciously or intentionally rigged the system against people of color. And until we acknowledge that the system was never fair and that it was intentionally made to hold people down, we can't change it. So that acknowledgement alone is massive for me. So I would say that there are enough people trying to uncover that it feels like progress for me compared to even 5 or 10 years ago.
Well, I want to make sure it's not progress to minorities, just so we can be on the same page, because conversations are just that, conversations. There is really not very much change, especially in the sports industry. And I understand where you're coming from. And that's easy, sit in those chairs and say, okay, well, we're finally talking about it. Well, and you said it, our starting point is totally different than our Caucasian brothers. And so we're not going to go back and fix the past. And if we're not going to make solutions for the future right now, then it's all the same. It's just optics. It's just talk. And to me, that's what it's always been. Okay, well, we're talking about.
So do you think it's all empty? Because that's what I'm trying to get to is I agree. It can't all be talk, and it can't be empty.
Sure.
Maybe I'm too optimistic.
Fair is fair. I mean, let's just be honest. I mean, let's quit, kind of going around, beating around the bush. Fair, right is right, wrong is wrong. So We all know what those things are. We know what fairness is and what it isn't. And so if you're not going to be intentional in doing things that way, then we're just blowing smoke. We're just talking. Okay. So to me, that's what's been going on for years. We're going to talk about it. Oh, now we're having better conversations about it. Well, now you're willing to talk about it. Well, they're willing to talk about it because we've seen all the injustice that's gone on. I mean, it was right there in your face. We never had phones where it could go from here to there like that. So now people see it.
Right.
But what it really is, this has been going on in our world forever. So now we see it a little bit more. We talk about it a little bit more, but this is a capitalist world. That's what this is. Until we be very honest and intentional about dealing with those things, nothing will change. And I'm 55 years old and it hasn't changed. Right. And I don't see.
And I think the generation is a big part of it too, because there are plenty of people who say the same things I was fighting for when I was 20 and then 40 and then 60. And the fact that I'm still fighting for them means that it hasn't changed. I think, unfortunately, I am less optimistic than I used to, but I tend toward optimism in the long run. And so for whatever reason, I'm hoping that some of these pivot points actually result. And like I said, I'm talking long-term change. I'm not talking overnight. So when you ask how to fix it, I don't think there's any way to fix it immediately, because you can't force private owners of teams to hire who you tell them to, which is, it would appear, would be the only way to get some of these teams to do it. So in the short term, no, we can't fix it, unfortunately, because the ownership across almost all professional sports is old cis white dudes. Long term, I'm probably wrong. Coach, unfortunately, has had more years to be disappointed by the world, and he's probably right. I would love to say that there are changing beliefs about human beings and their abilities, regardless of sexuality, gender, race, etc., and that there's progress being made, so it will build. But there's a famous, 2 steps forward, 2 steps backlash, right? Whenever there are progressive civil rights movements made in our country, they tend to be met with what we just had for 4 years, right? A deep fear of change, a deep fear of the other, and manifesting that and turning that into fear mongering that results in the majority turtling up and defending what they've got as if they're going to lose it. So
I just think
we say every week on this show, right? Normal isn't right. And just because what's been happening is the normal and people are used to it, it's not right. And we need to start making right normal. And you're right. Unfortunately, it's not a quick fix. It's something that
it is, Anthony. When you start digging into their pockets, that's when it changes. And so when these sponsors and everybody starts seeing it for what it should be, that's when it's going to change. There's a fix. Now, you're willing to do the fix is the question, because trust me, money does make it move. And
we saw that happen with the NFL, right? With the way that they pivoted on Kaepernick because of the country overall changing their views as a result of what happened this summer and everything else. Like, the movement started pushing in that direction. So the NFL had to start saying end racism while simultaneously having the Chiefs chant, which was an awkward thing to hold right next to each other. But you're right, Coach, about that. And so I wonder if maybe with different leadership and more of a listening to the majority, right? The majority of the country that believes in gun reform and the majority of the country that believes in climate change reform, like, instead of ignoring that mass, maybe you're right that the NFL's desire to not lose out on that money and support results in more proactivity. But do you think that trickles to the owners? Because in the end, it's just owners and front offices who make the coaching decisions.
Absolutely. I just think until there's some form of mandate or in consequence, it won't change. And
do you want that, though? Because a lot of people argue that that's not the way to achieve it.
I think it's the only way to make an impact in it. I think if we're going to talk about being fair, I mean, I went to the diversity and inclusion meeting in Indianapolis, and I made a suggestion that if you have 6 jobs open, give 3 to minorities, give 3 to Caucasian coaches. We've done all this with taking the head out of the game. Last time I checked, the head is still a part of the body. And we made coaches coach different, players play different. We mandated that. And all we saw, it was good for the game. You know, the National Football League always says they want to be on the cutting edge and do what's good for the game. And if diversity and inclusion is something you really talk about and say that you want to make a difference, then do it. You've done it before. Do it
Right.
again. You should have seen the heads in that room. They all dropped their head, you know, because how can you not? How can you not look at that and say that's fair? Because then we'll gather data that we can look at, and there'll be some coaches of color who do really well. There'll be some that don't do well, but you'll have the right data to say we're trending in the right direction and we're being fair. That's the biggest thing. We're being fair. And to me, it doesn't mean that every minority coach is going to be a great head coach. I think we all recognize that, understand that, no more than every Caucasian coach is going to be a great head coach. So, but be fair. And that's all anybody wants. Now we're giving away draft picks, you know, to the team that the people are leaving from, you know, to say, okay, this is how we're going to make this better. How does that make it better? It cheapens. I would be disappointed to be hired and knowing that I'm giving a third round pick to the team I'm leaving. Now, the team I'm going to, and maybe that's a different conversation, but the team I'm leaving, that makes no sense to me. They didn't really groom me. They didn't. I groomed myself. That's what happens in the National Football League. People don't groom you that way. But you get the right player and you coach the right player, and that's what happens. You get put in the right situation. That's what this is.
Well, I think people would ignorantly and disingenuously argue against the practice of forced hiring of specific, because then they would say that's actually not hiring, that's racist. It's not hiring based on who's best for the job, ignoring the fact that right now what's happening is racist unless you are willing to argue that the most qualified people for every job are white men and that there are no qualified Black men who can do the jobs. And that's where you run into that problem of we will not, and it's the same argument for why am I blanking, in college tuition, college admissions. You know what I'm talking about? When college admissions prioritize diverse candidates and minority applicants.
Oh,
what am I thinking of? I can't remember the name.
Term of it, but I know that.
We're all blanking, but you know what I'm saying. The arguments against that want to ignore all the context of why the system has been set up to prioritize and help white, wealthy applicants. And they want to put it into a bubble of that's racist to choose them based on their skin tone, ignoring the fact that every other part of life has already prioritized and helped. So yeah, I mean, a lot of people would react poorly to that, but I think it's a pretty good idea.
And college football is just as bad. I mean, it is a problem everywhere, you know, and so that's why I think if we're always talking about being on cutting edge and doing things the right way and really setting the standard, then why not take a shot at something that's totally out the box and different? And what do you have to lose? You know, and to me, the people who are heading these things up, if they're not going to be intentional, it won't change. And I hate to say it that way. I normally am pretty optimistic about things, but I have walked this now. I've walked this down. I've seen it, and I don't like where it's headed.
Yeah, after 100 years, right? Maybe it's time to start forcing change. And that's, it's gonna be hard. People don't like change just by nature, but I think that's the point where we're at. You know,
just said again, though, Anthony, 100 years. And there's been a total of 19 minority head coaches in the National Football League, 5 on offense. That is a joke. That is a total joke. No owner. There's been no minority owner representation. I mean, where are we? And then I hate to say it, but I seen Roger talk about, it's not just about the head coach. It's about, we have more minority GMs. We have more minority this or that. Are you kidding me? A few. We're talking about a few. So two more minority GMs were hired. So we have 4. Okay, so 4 out of 32? I mean, what are you saying? I mean, I struggle with that when he was talking about that. And we have a couple more coordinators. We have 3. Are you kidding me? So are you telling me we should be happy with what we have? That's what you're really saying. without saying it. Okay, so you got a couple here and there, it should be okay. That's wrong. That's totally wrong. And nobody ever challenges that. Those things get said, and they get said in a form of, we just,
progress, right?
yeah, it's getting better. What's getting better? What are you saying? We should be happy with the 4 we have, or the 3 we have, or the 5 we have. That's not what you say diversity and inclusion should equal. So you're talking out of both sides of your mouth. It makes no sense.
Well, and it's not going to come from the owners. I believe between Major League Baseball, the NFL, and the NBA, there's one Black owner, Michael Jordan. And that's a principal owner. There's some minority owners, but principal owner, one. So it's not going to come from there. So it has to come from the league, or else it won't. Sarah, we talk about this kind of a couple of different ways. So to the societal change, this is one, and we'll leave it on this because we're a little over time. But we talk about through history, every empire that has existed was built on the backs of slavery. And when those slaves either were freed or forced freedom, those empires all crumbled. And the US is America is the first empire, right, to go through this change and try to make it work, where they're not all just kind of disband to other countries. It's no, let's find a way to integrate and make it work. Mm-hmm. And we don't know if it can be done because it's never been done before, ever, in the history of the earth. So to Coach's point, if it's not forced, will it happen?
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, I do think that unfortunately we have to know that everything we were taught growing up wasn't right and true, and that what we've been told about our country being based on bravery and truth and pursuit of whatever instead of theft and dominance and slavery and all of that, like the last year plus for a lot of us has been a real waking up of diving in to how, if you believe in systems and industries because you've been told that they run fairly, and then you actually learn how much you were lied to about them, it sucks, and it makes you really angry. And I can only imagine how people of color feel when they try to be telling us that for the entirety of their lifetimes, and so many of us are clinging to the idea of what we were promised and told instead of the reality. So we need a radical reimagining of how we do things, and unfortunately there isn't anyone yet who believes that that's the best way to handle it. Even when you have an African American president, there's restrictions on power, and there's ways that that person wants to still play within the rules that have already been decided. And a lot of what we're discovering about policing and the government and the embedded cells of hate within the institutions that our country is built on make it feel like a pretty unbearable and overwhelming task to unravel everything and start over. But we have to at least first acknowledge them so that we can try. And that little tiny sliver of you got to break it all down to build it up is what had me feeling a tiny bit of hope when things look like they were rock bottom, is you got to get here and really be exposed for how awful everything is to fix it. But sure I'll be dead before any of that.
Well, we're going to keep talking about it. We're going to keep talking about it every week
as best we can.
Yeah.
Anthony, that's the hard part. And I just want to end with this. And I think, Sarah, you have so many great points. And what's hard for me is when we were in the midst of everything that was happening, it was talked about every day. Every day. Things were coming to the forefront. TV, radio, print media, you just name it. And then it all disappears. Like it's all better. We go right back to the unnormal way of doing things and thinking that it's right because it feels so normal. And people know this. And the media and how things are narrated and the narratives that are created, people take it and run with it. And it's almost like a spin cycle. It's tough now, boy, we're in it. Everybody's talking about it. And then soon as something, here came basketball, here comes some kind of sport, it just disappeared. And that's what I think we deal with right now. I don't see as much conversation as there was at one time. And to me, that's when the needle was moving. Everybody was feeling like there was real conversations happening. Businesses were talking about it. Everybody was. You don't see that anymore.
Right.
It's right
It
back.
was the analogy that I saw that was kind of fascinating was the idea of 2020 being the caterpillar, and we couldn't get out. There was nothing to distract us. We weren't allowed out of our houses. We were literally trapped. And during that time, we had the opportunity to merge as something different. And in some ways we did, but you're right. There was a captive audience combined with a trigger point, which was George Floyd's death, that afforded us the ability to focus solely on something as important as that without the distraction pulling us away from it, whether that's people going to jobs or watching sports or going to music or doing anything else with their lives, right? And as soon as those things started to be reintroduced, it allowed people an escape from the deeply uncomfortable act of getting to the truth of who we are instead of the idea of what we've always wanted to be. And that, it takes you back to the Kaepernick thing. He wasn't disrespecting anything. He was saying that the reality of what our flag is supposed to represent is more important than the material it's made out of. But people would rather care about a symbol than the reality that it's actually never been true for this country to be equal for all and everything, but it's so uncomfortable to think about redoing everything we know. Of course, for people of color, they're like, hey, this sucks. Let's try something else. And for a lot of women, we're like, yeah, this has sucked. We're cool with going for something new. And unfortunately, the people in power are like, ooh, that seems like maybe we'll lose some of our power, or it might be too difficult. And let's just keep it as much as we can so that we stay. And I don't know how I really don't know how you topple the people who are benefiting the most from keeping things the way they've always been.
Sarah, thank you so much for your time, Coach.
It was a depressing dismount.
Well, all right. Well, do you have a story to lighten up the mood to finish off? So we can finish off with something.
Let's see. Technically, right now, the Bears are still in the market for a franchise-changing quarterback. It could be Deshaun Watson. It could be Tua. We have no idea. The future could be bright. Things could be changing forever for us because we do not yet know who our starting quarterback will be next season. And the amount of time we have between now until the crushing disappointment of what they end up with is going to be the happiest time that we have with our football team.
And we're undefeated. We are undefeated.
We have not lost this. Well, we lost
this year.
We have
we
lost. Remember, we made the playoffs.
Yeah. Well,
remember that? Remember that when we backdoored our way into an expanded playoffs because another team lost, and then they were like, "We did well. I think we should keep everything the same."
Kind of trying to forget that. Coach,
God, it got depressing again.
Damn it, Coach! You got to cheer us up, Coach. Anything positive.
Hey, you guys! I hope you get Deshaun Watson.
How's the weather in Florida? How about that?
There you go.
It was 82 degrees today. It was nice.
All right. Perfect.
Yeah.
I'm going to be in Arizona in less than a month. I'm just going to think about that for the next however long, and that'll keep me smiling.
Well, there you go. Guys, thank you again. Thank you so much for your time, and we'll talk again very soon.
All righty. Thanks again. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. See ya.
This has been The Coach and AK Experience, part of the Sports Fluent Network.